Welcome to ThePrint. We are here to talk about whether the Indian economy will grow at 7% in 2019-20 as projected by the Economic Survey for the year 2018-19. The survey has been authored by Krishnamurthy V. Subramanian, the Chief Economic Advisor, and this is his first survey. What he has projected is a 7% growth for India in 2019-20. The projections are similar to what the Reserve Bank of India has also made. The RBI has also forecast that the economy will grow at 7% in 2019-20. RBI actually revised its projection downwards from 7.2% that it made in April to 7%, which was made in June. This comes at a time when there's been a lot of talk about a slowdown in investment and private consumption, especially in rural areas. This has been reflected by a sharp fall in economic growth in 2018-19. The Indian economy grew at 6.8% in 2018-19, and it actually slowed for the second consecutive year. It had grown at 7.2% in 2017-18 and at 8.2% in 16-17. So it has been a second consecutive year of fall in 18-19, which the Modi government hopes to reverse with this 7% economic forecast. Please do send us your questions, and we'll try to answer them as best we can. The first question that we have got is on which sectors are likely to contribute to this growth. Mainly so far that we have seen, it's been sectors like services which have driven the growth so far. Manufacturing activity has been slow and the pace is yet to pick up. Agriculture has also been relatively subdued. That's why there's this whole fear that probably even 7% may be difficult to achieve in 1920, because there are a lot of assumptions that go behind the 7% growth. There's the assumption that probably investment activity will pick up. Many private sector will start investing into projects, so you will see an increase in capital expenditure, both led by the government and the private sector. There's also this hope that there will be a lot of pickup in private consumption, especially as rural incomes grow. Rural fall in rural consumption has been a big setback to consumption, because it has seen a corresponding fall in auto sales, in the sale of fast moving consumer goods. So that's that's an area that one needs to see how it will pan out. The next question that we have is whether how do we see agriculture growing? Agriculture is again a very uncertain sector. It's heavily dependent on monsoons. As we have seen, the monsoon onset has been delayed, and it is also the progress of the monsoon has also been delayed. We've seen on how the sowing has fallen sharply for kharif crops. Because of all these reasons, agricultural growth could be a pain point when we come to the growth numbers for 1920. It will really depend on how monsoon picks up from here on and how evenly it is distributed going forward. Then we have a question on how we compare the economic survey that's presented by Krishnamurthy Subramanian with that of his predecessor Arvind Subramanian. That's an interesting question, because every chief economic advisor brings his own flair of writing into the economic survey. So what we saw when Arvind Subramanian had presented his 4 economic surveys were, these big ideas that he had thrown up, during his survey. So the 16-17, the economic survey for 16-17 talked about the concept of a universal basic income, basically a concept which sought to give a basic income, guarantee a basic income to every Indian resident. So that was a concept that was debated, and there was a lot of speculation of whether the government will bite the bullet and roll out the scheme, but that never happened. But it is one big idea that is still debated. Among his other ideas, he coined this famous term of the Jam Trinity, basically where he talked about on how bank accounts opened under the Jan Dhan Yojana, Aadhaar, the unique identification number, and mobile telephones, how putting together these 3 components could ensure a more effective delivery of subsidies, especially through cash transfers. So that was one big terminology term that he had coined. Another interesting term that he had coined was the 4 Rs, wherein he talked about on how to resolve the NPA problem, there needs to be like a mix of recognition of bad assets, recapitalization of state-run banks, and resolution of these stressed assets, through sale or other methodologies. So these are like some of the interesting terms that he had coined, and these were these big ideas, some of which were implemented partially, some of which were never implemented, some of which saw better implementation. To that extent, this survey doesn't have that one big radical idea, but it does talk about a lot of things in terms of, it's very interesting because it talks about a lot of things about how there could be a behavioral change and how behavioral economics can be used to better to increase the whole to speed up social change, like how Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao could now be changed into how Betis are like Lakshmis of a household. So there are very interesting things that how Swachh Bharat can be now turned into Sundar Bharat. So there are a lot of catchy phrases that he has used, but probably not like one big idea that comes through. The next question that we have, we will be sticking, we have been asked, we will be sticking to the fiscal path which has been laid out. If private investment has to increase, it cannot be allowed to be crowded out by public investment. This is the CA's comment, and we are asked that what does this mean? So basically what he say, the whole concept of crowding out private investment basically refers to the fact that when government increases its spending, when public investment picks up, it means that the government is forced to borrow more. When the government is forced to borrow more, it pushes up interest rates, thereby making it difficult for the private sector to borrow. So that's the term that is typically used as crowding out private investment, and it's always been a worry that when the growth is basically public investment led, there is a disincentive for the private sector to invest because they are like faced with higher interest rates. The next question that we have is, Rishikant Chaudhary asks, if the budget reveals any strategy for doubling the farmers' income by 2022. There have been many steps that have been mentioned in the previous year's budgets to increase farmer incomes in terms of better improving productivity, increasing the price for the final output. But we will have to see in tomorrow's budget if there are any more concrete steps that are laid out to increase farmer incomes, especially given that rural distress is a very genuine problem right now, and is just further likely to accentuate given the path of the monsoon. Raviraj asks, don't you think he has presented a survey in pressure of government and more favorable leanings towards the government? He is a chief economic advisor who has been appointed by this government, and he is a part of the government now. So to say that it's a it may not really be correct to like pin this economic survey in those ways. Typically, an economic survey has not really been very overtly critical of the government, and typically has been used as more of a review of how the economy has fared in the previous year and probably what could be done. So it's never a document that is overtly critical of the current day government. Arjun Suresh asks, the last year's survey focused on India's unwanted girls. Does this year's economic survey talk about that? This year's economic survey talks about empowering girls and how there is a need to change the societal mindset to ensure that girls get the respect and reverence that they used to enjoy in the ancient Indian society. Then they also asked how the GDP is calculated. The GDP growth rate is basically calculated on the growth rate change in GDP at constant prices. There are a lot of methodologies that are used to arrive at GDP. One would be your income method, one would be your expenditure method, and one. We've run out of questions, so thank you so much for taking out time speaking.